A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov. Vladimir Nabokov's Foreword. In 1841, a few months before his death in a pistol duel with a fellow officer at the foot of Mount Mashuk in the Caucasus, Mikhail Lermontov, 1814 to 1841, composed a prophetic poem. In noon's heat, in a dale of Dagestan, with lead inside my breast, stirless I lay. The deep wound still smoked on, my blood kept trickling drop by drop away. On the dale's sand alone I lay, the cliffs crowded around in ledges steep, and the sun scorched their tawny tops and scorched me, but I slept death sleep. And in a dream I saw an evening feast that in my native land with bright lights shone. Among young women crowded with flowers, a merry talk concerning me went on. But in the merry talk not joining, one of them sat there lost in thought, and in a melancholy dream her young soul was immersed, God knows by what. And of a dale in Dagestan she dreamt. In that dale lay the corpse of one she knew. Within his breast a smoking wound showed black, and blood ran in a stream that colder grew. This remarkable composition, which in the original is in iambic pentameter throughout, with alternate feminine and masculine rhymes, might be entitled The Triple Dream. There is an initial dreamer, Lermontov, or more exactly his poetical impersonator, who dreams that he lies dying in a valley of eastern Caucasus. This is Dream 1, dreamt by Dreamer 1. The fatally wounded man, Dreamer 2, dreams in his turn of a young woman sitting at a feast in St. Petersburg or Moscow. This is Dream 2 within Dream 1. The young woman sitting at the feast sees in her mind Dreamer 2, who dies in the course of the poem, in the surroundings of remote Dagestan. This is Dream 3 within Dream 2 within Dream 1, which describes a spiral by bringing us back to the first stanza. The whorls of these 5 strophes have a certain structural affinity with the interlacings of the 5 stories that make up Lermontov's novel, A Hero of Our Time. Gheroi Nashego Vremeni. In the first 2 stories, Bella and Maxim Maximich, Lermontov, or more exactly his fictional impersonator, an inquisitive traveler, relates a journey he made along the military Georgian road in the Caucasus around 1837. This is narrator 1. On the way north from Tiflis, he meets an old campaigner, Maxim Maximich. They travel together for a while, and Maxim Maximich tells narrator 1 about a certain Grigory Pechorin who 5 years before, in the Chechnya region, north of Dagestan, kidnapped a Circassian girl. Maxim Maximich is narrator 2, and the story is Bella. At a second meeting on the road in Maxim Maximich, narrator 1 and narrator 2 come across Pechorin in the flesh. Henceforth, Pechorin, whose journal narrator 1 publishes, becomes narrator 3, for it is from his journal that the remaining 3 stories are posthumously drawn. It will be marked by the good reader that the structural trick consists in bringing Pechorin gradually nearer and nearer until he takes over. But by the time he takes over, he is dead. In the first story, Pechorin is twice removed from the reader, since his personality is described through Maxim Maximich, whose words are transmitted to us by narrator 1. In the second story, the personality of narrator 2 no longer stands between Pechorin and narrator 1, who at last sees the hero for himself. Maxim Maximich is, in fact, pathetically eager to produce the real Pechorin on top of the subject of his yarn. And finally, in the last 3 stories, Both narrator 1 and narrator 2 step aside, and the reader meets Pechorin, narrator 3, face to face. This involute structure is responsible for blurring somewhat the time sequence of the novel. The 5 stories grow, revolve, reveal, and mask their contours, turn away and reappear in a new attitude or light, like 5 mountain peaks attending a traveler along the meanders of a Caucasian canyon road. The traveler is Lermontov, not Pechorin. The 5 tales are placed in the novel according to the order in which the events become known to narrator 1. But their chronological sequence is different, going something like this. Number 1. Around 1830, an officer, Grigory Pechorin, narrator 3, on his way from St. Petersburg to the Caucasus, whither he is being sent on some military errand to a detachment on active duty, happens to be stranded at the village of Taman, a port facing the northeast coast of the Crimea. An adventure he has there forms the subject of Taman. The 3rd story in the book. Number 2. After some time spent on active duty in skirmishes with the mountain tribes, Pechorin, on May 10, 1832, arrives for a rest at a Caucasian spa, Piatigorsk. At Piatigorsk and at Kislovodsk, a neighboring resort, he participates in a series of dramatic events that lead to his killing a fellow officer in a duel on June 17th. These events are related by him in the 4th story, Princess Mary. Number 3, on June 19th, the military authorities have Pechorin dispatched to a fort in the Chechnya region, northeast Caucasus, where he arrives only in autumn after an unexplained delay. There he meets the junior captain, Maxim Maximich. This is related to narrator 1 by narrator 2 in the 1st story, Bella. Number 4, in December of the same year, 1832, Pechorin leaves the fort for a fortnight, which he spends in a Cossack settlement north of the Terek River, and there has the adventure described by him in the 5th, last story, The Fatalist. Number 5, in the spring of 1833, he kidnaps a Circassian girl who was assassinated by a bandit 4.5 months later. In December 1833, Pechorin leaves for Georgia, and sometime later he goes home to St. Petersburg. This is related in Bella. Number 6, some 4 years later, in the autumn of 1837, narrator 1 and narrator 2, on their way north, stop at the town of Vladikavkaz, and there run to Pechorin, who, in the meantime, has returned to the Caucasus and is now on his way south to Persia. This is related by narrator 1 and Maxim Maximich, the 2nd story in the book. Number 7, in 1838 or 1839, on his way back from Persia, Pechorin dies under circumstances possibly related to a prediction made to him that he would die in consequence of an unfortunate marriage. Narrator 1 now publishes the dead man's journal, obtained from narrator 2. Pechorin's death is mentioned by narrator 1 in his editorial foreword, 1841, to Pechorin's journal containing Taman, Princess Mary, and the Fatalist. Thus, the order of the 5 stories in relation to Pechorin is Taman, Princess Mary, the Fatalist, Bella, and Maxim Maximich. It is unlikely that Lermontov foresaw the plot of Princess Mary while he was writing Bella. The details of Pechorin's arrival at the Kameny Brod Fort, as given in Bella by Maxim Maximich, do not quite tally with the details given by Pechorin himself in Princess Mary. The inconsistencies in the 5 stories are numerous and glaring, but the narrative surges on with such speed and force, such manly and romantic beauty pervades it, and the general purpose of Lermontov breathes such fierce integrity that the reader does not stop to wonder why the mermaid in Taman assumed that Pechorin could not swim, or why the captain of dragoons thought that Pechorin's seconds would not want to supervise the loading of the pistols. The plight of Pechorin, who was forced, after all, to face Grushnitsky's pistol, would be rather ridiculous had we not understood that our hero relied not on chance but on fate. This is made quite clear in the last and best story, The Fatalist, where the crucial passage also turns on a pistol being or not being loaded, and where a kind of duel by proxy is fought between Pechorin and Vulich, with fate, instead of the smirking dragoon, supervising the lethal arrangements. A special feature of the structure of our book is the monstrous but perfectly organic part that eavesdropping plays in it. Now, eavesdropping is only one form of a more general device which can be classified under the heading of coincidence, to which belongs, for instance, the coincidental meeting, another variety. It is pretty clear that when a novelist desires to combine the traditional tale of romantic adventure, amorous intrigue, jealousy, revenge, etc., with a narrative in the first person and has no desire to invent new techniques, he is somewhat limited in the choice of devices. I'm going to reread that paragraph, it got by me. A special feature of the structure of our book is the monstrous but perfectly organic part that eavesdropping plays in it. Now, eavesdropping is only one form of a more general device which can be classified under the heading of coincidence, to which belongs, for instance, the coincidental meeting, another variety. It is pretty clear that when a novelist desires to combine the traditional tale of romantic adventure, amorous intrigue, jealousy, revenge, etc., with a narrative in the first person and has no desire to invent new techniques, he is somewhat limited in the choice of devices. The 18th century epistolary form of novel, with the heroine writing to her girlfriend and the hero writing to his old schoolmate, followed by at least 10 other combinations, was so stale by Lermontov's time that he could hardly have used it. And since, on the other hand, our author was more eager to have his story move than to vary, elaborate And since, on the other hand, our author was more eager to have his story move than to vary, elaborate, and conceal the methods of its propulsion, he employed the convenient device of having his Maxim Maximich and Pechorin overhear, spy upon, and witness any such scene as was needed for the elucidation or the promotion of the plot. Indeed, the author's use of this device is so consistent throughout the book that it ceases to strike the reader as a marvelous vagary of chance and becomes, as it were, the barely noticeable routine of fate. In Bella, there are 3 cases of eavesdropping. From behind a fence, narrator 2 overhears a boy trying to coax a robber into selling him a horse, page 15. And later on, the same narrator overhears, first from under a window and then from behind a door, 2 crucial conversations between Pechorin and Bella, page 25 to 27. In Taman, from behind a jutting rock, narrator 3 overhears a conversation between a girl and a blind lad, which informs everybody concerned, including the reader, of the smuggling business, page 69. And the same eavesdropper, from another point of vantage, a cliff above the shore, overhears the final conversation between the smugglers, pages 78 to 79. In Princess Mary, narrator 3 eavesdrops as many as 8 times, in consequence of which he is always in the know. From behind the corner of a covered walk, he sees Mary retrieving the mug dropped by disabled Grushnitsky, page 88. From behind a tall shrub, he overhears a sentimental dialogue between the two, page 108. From behind a stout lady, he overhears the talk that leads to an attempt on the part of the dragoon to have Mary insulted by a pre-Dostoevskian drunk, page 112. From an unspecified distance, he stealthily watches Mary yawning at Grushnitsky's jokes, page 122. From the midst of a ballroom crowd, he catches her ironic retorts to Grushnitsky's romantic entreaties, pages 133 to 134. From outside, quote, an improperly closed shutter, end of quote, he sees and hears the dragoon plotting with Grushnitsky to fake a duel with him. Pechorin, pages 145 to 147. Through a window curtain, which is, quote, not completely drawn, end of quote, he observes Mary pensively sitting on her bed, page 151. In a restaurant, from behind a door that leads to the corner room where Grushnitsky and his friends are assembled, Pechorin hears himself accused of visiting Mary at night, pages 153 to 154. And finally, and most conveniently, Dr. Werner, Pechorin's second, overhears a conversation between the dragoon and Grushnitsky, which leads Werner and Pechorin to conclude that only one pistol will be loaded, page 157. This accumulation of knowledge on the part of the hero causes the reader to await, with frantic interest, the inevitable scene when Pechorin will crush Grushnitsky with the disclosure of this knowledge. This is the first English translation of Lermontov's novel. The book has been paraphrased into English several times, but never translated before. The experienced hack may find it quite easy to turn Lermontov's Russian into slick English cliches by means of judicious omission, amplification, and levigation, and he will tone down everything that might seem unfamiliar to the meek and imbecile reader visualized by his publisher. But the honest translator is faced with a different task. In the first place, we must dismiss once and for all the conventional notion that a translation, quote, should read smoothly, end of quote, and, quote, should not sound like a translation, end of quote. To quote the would-be compliments addressed to vague versions by genteel reviewers who never have and never will read the original texts. In point of fact, any translation that does not sound like a translation is bound to be inexact upon inspection, while, on the other hand, the only virtue of a good translation is faithfulness and completeness. Whether it reads smoothly or not depends on the model, not on the mimic. In attempting to translate Lermontov, I have gladly sacrificed to the requirements of exactness a number of important things: good taste, neat diction, and even grammar, when some characteristic solecism occurs in the Russian text. The English reader should be aware that Lermontov's prose style in Russian is inelegant. It is dry and drab. It is the tool of an energetic, incredibly gifted, bitterly honest, but definitely inexperienced young man. His Russian is, at times, almost as crude as Stendhal's French. His similes and metaphors are utterly commonplace. His hackneyed epithets are only redeemed by occasionally being incorrectly used. Repetition of words in descriptive sentences irritates the purist. And all this the translator should faithfully render, no matter how much he may be tempted to fill out the lapse and delete the redundancy. When Lermontov started to write, Russian prose had already evolved that predilection for certain terms that became typical of the Russian novel. Every translator becomes aware in the course of his task that apart from idiomatic locutions, the from language has a certain number of constantly iterated words which, though readily translatable, occur in the into language far less frequently and less colloquially. Through long use, these words have become mere pegs or signs, the meeting places of mental associations, the reunions of related notions. They are tokens of sense rather than particularizations of sense. Of the 100 or so peg words familiar to any student of Russian literature, the following may be listed as being especial favorites with Lermontov.